I never thought a bag of ice melt would land someone in jail, but that was before I met Brenda Patterson, the president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association in suburban Columbus, Ohio. It started on a freezing January morning when I stepped outside my front door and noticed something was off. The 20-pound bag of ice melt I had ordered online and been delivered the day before was gone. Not moved, not knocked over by the wind, just completely vanished from my porch. I stood there in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, staring at the empty spot where it should have been. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees overnight, and a fresh layer of ice coated my driveway and walkway. Without that ice melt, I was basically trapped. My name is Ethan Anderson, and I had moved into this neighborhood 6 months earlier, thinking it would be a peaceful place to settle down after my divorce. The houses were nice, the lawns were manicured, and everything looked picture perfect. What I did not know was that Brenda Patterson ran this HOA like it was her personal kingdom, and she had opinions about everything from the color of your mailbox to the brand of fertilizer you used on your grass. I went back inside and checked my phone. The delivery confirmation showed the package had been dropped off at 4:30 the previous afternoon, complete with a photo of it sitting right there on my porch. I scrolled through my security camera footage, which I had installed after someone complained about my trash cans being visible from the street for more than 2 hours on collection day. The footage showed the delivery driver placing the bag exactly where it should be. Then, at 6:45 in the evening, a figure appeared on screen. Brenda Patterson walked right up to my porch, looked around like she was checking for witnesses, grabbed my bag of ice melt and carried it away. She did not even try to hide what she was doing. She just took it and walked down the street toward her house, which was 4 doors down from mine. I felt my blood pressure rising as I watched the footage 3 more times. This woman had actually stolen from my porch. Not only was she the HOA president, but she was also a self-appointed neighborhood watch captain who sent violation notices for the smallest infractions. Just last week, she had fined my neighbor $200 because his holiday lights were still up on January 6th, 1 day past the HOA mandated removal date. I threw on some clothes and carefully made my way down my icy driveway to my car. The drive to the hardware store took 20 minutes, and I spent another $40 on a new bag of ice melt that I had already paid for once. When I got home, I spread it on my walkway and driveway, fuming the entire time. That afternoon, I knocked on Brenda's door. She answered wearing a cream-colored cardigan and pearls, her blonde hair styled in that specific way that screamed, "Let me speak to your manager." She looked at me with this expression of fake concern that probably worked on people who did not know her yet. "Ethan, what can I do for you?" she asked, not even inviting me in from the cold. "You can return my ice melt," I said, keeping my voice level. "I have you on camera taking it from my porch last night." Her face did not even flicker. "I have no idea what you are talking about. If you are missing something, perhaps you should be more careful about securing your belongings. This neighborhood has standards, you know. Leaving things scattered on your porch is against HOA regulations, Section 12, Paragraph 4. I could not believe what I was hearing. "I did not leave it scattered. It was delivered, and you stole it." "That is a very serious accusation," she said, her voice taking on that sharp edge that I had heard her use with other neighbors. "I suggest you check your facts before you go around slandering the HOA president. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a meeting to prepare for." She started to close the door, but I put my hand up. "Brenda, I have video footage, clear footage of you taking my property." "Then I suppose you should take it to the police if you are so certain," she said with a thin smile. though I imagine they have better things to do than investigate missing bags of salt. Good day, Ethan. The door clicked shut in my face. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. She had essentially dared me to involve the police, probably thinking I would not bother over a $20 bag of ice melt. But this was not really about the ice melt anymore. This was about the principle, and about the fact that Brenda Patterson thought she was above the law just because she ran the HOA. I drove straight to the Columbus Police Department's substations in my area and asked to file a report. The officer at the desk, a tired-looking guy named Officer Martinez, listened to my story with a skeptical expression. "So she took a bag of ice melt?" he asked. "Yes, I have it on video, clear video from my security camera." He sighed and pulled out some paperwork. "All right, let me get your information. But I have to be honest with you, for something like this, even with video, it is usually not worth pursuing." "She is the HOA president," I said. "She sends people violation notices and fines them for the smallest things, and then she turns around and commits theft. I want to press charges." Something in my tone must have convinced him I was serious. He took down all my information, watched the video on my phone, and nodded slowly. "Okay, this is actually pretty clear footage. Let me talk to my supervisor." 20 minutes later, I was giving a full statement to a Detective Sarah Chen, who seemed much more interested in the case than Officer Martinez had been. "Here is the thing," Detective Chen said, leaning back in her chair. "We have had multiple complaints about this HOA and its president over the past year. Nothing we could really act on, just people feeling harassed and bullied. But this is actual theft, caught on camera. If you are willing to press charges, we can definitely move forward." "I am absolutely willing to press charges," I said. She smiled slightly. "Good. We will need a copy of that video footage and your written statement. I will go have a conversation with Miss Patterson tomorrow." I left the police station feeling vindicated. Maybe I was making a big deal out of a bag of ice melt, but someone needed to stand up to Brenda Patterson and her tyrannical rule over our neighborhood. The next evening, I was heating up dinner when I saw Detective Chen's unmarked car pull up in front of Brenda's house. I watched from my window as she knocked on the door. Even from 4 houses away, I could see Brenda's body language change from welcoming to defensive in about 3 seconds. The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes before Detective Chen handed Brenda something, probably a citation or a notice to appear in court, and left. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing with text messages. The first was from my neighbor directly next door, Patricia Hayes, who was actually friendly and had warned me about Brenda when I first moved in. "What did you do? Brenda is losing her mind." Then came a message from the HOA group chat, which I had muted months ago. I opened it to find a long rant from Brenda about how certain neighbors were causing trouble and making false accusations against hardworking community volunteers. She did not name me specifically, but everyone would know who she meant. My phone rang. It was Patricia. "Hey," I answered. "Ethan, please tell me you are the one who got the police involved with Brenda," she said, sounding excited rather than concerned. "She stole my ice melt off my porch. I have it on video." Patricia laughed, actually laughed. "Oh my God, this is amazing. Do you know how many people she has terrorized since she became HOA president 3 years ago? But no one has ever actually done anything about it because she is so vindictive with the violation notices and fines." "Well, I did something about it," I said. "Good. Good for you, just be prepared. She is going to make your life hell." Patricia was right. The next morning, I found a violation notice on my door. Apparently, my trash cans were visible from the street, even though they were in my garage. The notice included a grainy photo that looked like it had been taken from the street at an extreme angle, just barely showing the edge of one trash can through my garage window. The fine was $300. I took a picture of the notice and sent it to Detective Chen with a message explaining what was happening. She responded within an hour. Document everything. This could establish a pattern of harassment. Over the next week, I received 4 more violation notices. One claimed my mailbox was not regulation black, even though it was the same mailbox that was there when I bought the house, and the same color as everyone else's on the street. Another said I had parked my car on the street overnight, which was technically true because I had been waiting for my garage door opener to be repaired. But the HOA rules allowed for temporary street parking with notice, which I had provided. The fines totaled over $1,000. I was not the only one receiving sudden attention from Brenda. Patricia texted me that she had gotten 2 violation notices in 3 days after years of never receiving a single one. Another neighbor, Marcus Webb, who had given a statement to Detective Chen about his own experiences with Brenda, found himself cited for having a decorative garden gnome that was apparently not on the approved list of lawn ornaments. The court date arrived in early February. It was set in the Columbus Municipal Court, and I took a personal day off from my job as an accountant to attend. I wore my best suit and brought my laptop with the video footage queued up, even though Detective Chen had already submitted it as evidence. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that gave everything a slightly greenish tint. I sat in the gallery and waited for Brenda's case to be called. She arrived 15 minutes before the docket began, wearing a navy blue pantsuit and carrying a leather portfolio. She saw me and her expression hardened, but she did not say anything. When the bailiff called the State of Ohio versus Brenda Lynn Patterson, we both stood and approached our respective tables. Brenda had hired a lawyer, a younger guy in an expensive suit who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. I was representing myself, which made Brenda's lawyer visibly relax. He probably thought this would be easy. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Margaret Reynolds, and she had the kind of face that suggested she had heard every excuse and seen every trick in the book. She reviewed the case file and then looked up at us. "Miss Patterson, you are charged with petty theft. The complainant alleges that you took a bag of ice melt from his porch without permission, and there is video evidence to support this claim. How do you plead?" Brenda's lawyer stood. "Not guilty, Your Honor. This is a misunderstanding between neighbors, blown completely out of proportion." Judge Reynolds nodded and looked at me. "Mr. Anderson, would you like to present your evidence?" I stood and explained the situation clearly and concisely. I talked about the delivery, the missing ice melt, the security camera footage, and my conversation with Brenda where she denied everything. Then I played the video on my laptop, which was connected to a monitor the judge could see. The footage was crystal clear. The timestamp showed the date and time. Brenda walked up to my porch, looked around, picked up the bag, and walked away with it. There was no ambiguity, no question about what was happening. Judge Reynolds watched the video twice, then looked at Brenda's lawyer. "Counselor, I am not sure what your defense is going to be here. The video is quite clear." The lawyer stood and tried his best. "Your Honor, Miss Patterson believed that the bag had been abandoned and was creating a code violation. As president of the Homeowners Association, she has a duty to maintain neighborhood standards. She removed what she thought was improperly stored material and intended to follow up with the homeowner. I could not help myself. Then, why did she deny taking it when I confronted her the next day? Why did she tell me to check my facts?" Judge Reynolds held up her hand. Mr. Anderson, you will have a chance to respond. Please continue, counselor. The lawyer looked uncomfortable. Miss Patterson may have been confused about which specific item Mr. Anderson was referring to. She handles many community matters. So, her defense is that she was confused about stealing from someone's porch, Judge Reynolds asked, her tone making it clear what she thought of that argument. Your Honor, this is a first offense. Miss Patterson is a respected member of the community who volunteers her time to keep the neighborhood running smoothly. A criminal conviction would be devastating and disproportionate to the alleged offense. Judge Reynolds leaned back in her chair. Mr. Anderson, would you like to say anything before I make my ruling? I stood again. Yes, Your Honor. I want to add that after I filed this complaint, Miss Patterson began targeting me with numerous HOA violation notices, many of which are frivolous or false. She has also targeted other neighbors who supported my complaint. I have documentation of all of this if the court would like to see it. The judge's eyebrows rose. That is a serious allegation. Do you have this documentation with you? I pulled out a folder with copies of all the violation notices I had received, along with photos proving that most of them were baseless. I also had printed text messages from Patricia and Marcus describing their own sudden increase in violations. Judge Reynolds spent several minutes reviewing the documents. Her expression grew increasingly stern. Miss Patterson, she said finally, would you care to explain this pattern of behavior? Brenda stood for the first time, her lawyer trying to pull her back down. Your Honor, I am simply enforcing the HOA rules that every resident agreed to when they purchased their homes. If Mr. Anderson and others are receiving violation notices, it is because they are violating community standards. And the fact that these violations all began immediately after Mr. Anderson filed a police complaint is just coincidence, Judge Reynolds asked. I do my job thoroughly, Brenda said, her voice tight. If people do not like the rules, they should not have moved into a community with an HOA. The judge set down the papers and looked at Brenda for a long moment. Miss Patterson, I have been on the bench for 22 years, and I have seen a lot of cases involving HOAs. Some HOAs serve their communities well. Others become tools for petty tyrants to harass their neighbors. Based on the evidence before me today, you fall into the latter category. Brenda's face flushed red. Your Honor, I object to that characterization. You can object all you want, Judge Reynolds said, but the evidence is clear. You stole property from Mr. Anderson's porch. When confronted, you lied about it. When he exercised his legal right to file a complaint, you retaliated by abusing your position in the HOA to harass him and others. This is not just petty theft. This is a pattern of behavior that shows a complete disregard for the law and for basic decency. The courtroom was silent. Even Brenda's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. I find you guilty of petty theft, Judge Reynolds continued, but more than that, I am deeply troubled by what I see here. The evidence of retaliation and harassment suggests that you have been abusing your position for some time. Mr. Anderson, have there been other incidents with Miss Patterson that you have not reported? I thought about it. She tried to fine me $500 when I first moved in because my moving truck was parked in front of my house for more than 4 hours during my move. She has sent me multiple notices about things like my grass being a 1/4 inch too long or my mailbox being slightly crooked. But I thought that was just how HOAs worked. That is not how they are supposed to work, the judge said. She looked at the prosecutor, who had been mostly silent during the proceedings. I want to see if there are grounds for additional charges related to harassment and abuse of authority. This has gone beyond a simple theft case. The prosecutor, a woman named Jessica Torres, nodded. We can investigate further, Your Honor. Judge Reynolds turned back to Brenda. "In the meantime, I am going to set bail pending sentencing. I want a full pre-sentencing report, including an investigation into your conduct as HOA president. Bail is set at $5,000. Brenda's mouth fell open. "Bail? For a bag of ice melt? No, Miss Patterson. Bail because I believe you pose a continued threat to harass and intimidate members of your community. If you post bail, you are ordered to have no contact with Mr. Anderson or any of the other witnesses in this case. You are also ordered to step down temporarily from your position as HOA president, pending the outcome of this case. If you violate any of these conditions, you will be held in contempt, and your bail will be revoked." Brenda's lawyer finally managed to pull her back into her seat as she started to protest. He whispered urgently in her ear, and she reluctantly went quiet, though her face was purple with rage. The judge set a sentencing date for 3 weeks later and dismissed us. As I gathered my things, I could feel Brenda staring daggers at me from across the courtroom. Patricia, who had come to watch the proceedings, met me in the hallway outside. "That was incredible," she said. "I have never seen anyone stand up to Brenda like that." "I just told the truth," I said, though I felt a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. I had won this round, but I knew Brenda would not go down without a fight. Brenda posted bail that same day, and within hours, I heard from Marcus that she was already trying to hold an emergency HOA meeting to contest her removal as president. However, several board members had apparently grown tired of her behavior and refused to support her. By the end of the week, she had been formally removed from her position by a vote of the board, with an interim president appointed in her place. The interim president was a reasonable guy named Tom Fletcher, who had served on the board for years, but had been largely overshadowed by Brenda's domineering personality. One of his first acts was to review all the violation notices that had been issued in the past year. He called me personally to apologize. "Ethan, I went through the files," he said. "At least 60% of the violations Brenda issued were either completely fabricated or were for such minor infractions that they should never have resulted in fines. I am voiding all of your pending violations and refunding any fines you have paid." "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." "No, thank you," Tom replied. "Someone needed to stand up to her. She was making everyone miserable, but we all felt powerless because she knew the HOA rules inside and out and used them as weapons." Over the next 3 weeks, more information came to light. Detective Chen called me to say that several other neighbors had come forward with complaints about Brenda dating back years. One family had been fined thousands of dollars for violations they claimed were manufactured. Another neighbor said Brenda had threatened to put a lien on her house over unpaid fines for having the wrong shade of beige on her shutters. The prosecutor's office launched a formal investigation into Brenda's conduct as HOA president, and they discovered something even more damning. Brenda had been embezzling money from the HOA's general fund to pay for personal expenses, including a vacation to Hawaii and renovations to her own home. The amounts were not huge, maybe $8,000 over 2 years, but it was enough to add felony charges to her growing list of legal problems. The sentencing hearing arrived on a cold Monday morning in late February. The courtroom was more crowded this time, with at least a dozen neighbors showing up to watch. Brenda sat at the defendant's table with her lawyer, looking significantly less composed than she had at the first hearing. The purple bags under her eyes suggested she had not been sleeping well. Judge Reynolds entered, and we all stood. She took her seat and reviewed the pre-sentencing report for several minutes before looking up. "Miss Patterson, since your initial hearing, quite a bit of additional information has come to light. The investigation into your conduct as HOA president has revealed a pattern of abuse of authority, harassment, and financial misconduct. The prosecution has filed additional charges of embezzlement and extortion. How do you plead to these new charges? Brenda's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to the additional charges. We believe that any financial discrepancies can be explained as accounting errors, and the allegations of extortion are simply disgruntled neighbors unhappy with legitimate enforcement of HOA rules. Judge Reynolds looked skeptical. We will address those charges in a separate hearing. For now, we are here to discuss sentencing for the theft conviction. Miss Patterson, would you like to make a statement before I impose sentence? Brenda stood slowly. She looked like she wanted to maintain her defiant attitude, but some of the fight had gone out of her. Your Honor, I have dedicated 3 years of my life to serving my community as HOA president. I have worked tirelessly to maintain property values and keep our neighborhood beautiful. If I made mistakes, they were honest mistakes made in service of that goal. I never intended to harm anyone. It was a carefully worded statement, probably written by her lawyer, and it rang completely hollow. Judge Reynolds seemed to agree. Miss Patterson, I have reviewed the evidence extensively. This was not an honest mistake. You deliberately stole property from your neighbor's porch, lied about it when confronted, and then launched a campaign of retaliation when he exercised his legal rights. The additional evidence suggests this was part of a long-standing pattern of behavior in which you abused your authority to bully and intimidate your neighbors. The judge paused, and the courtroom was completely silent. Normally, for a first-time offense of petty theft, I might consider a suspended sentence or community service. But this case is different. You held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that trust repeatedly. You used your authority as a weapon against people who had no real recourse. You stole from them, not just property but peace of mind and the basic right to live without harassment. Brenda's hands were gripping the table in front of her, her knuckles white. I am sentencing you to 30 days in the county jail, Judge Reynolds said. This sentence will run consecutively with whatever sentence you receive on the additional charges. You are also ordered to pay restitution to Mr. Anderson for the cost of the ice melt and his time and expenses related to this case. Additionally, you are permanently barred from holding any position of authority within the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association or any other HOA. 30 days in jail. For stealing a bag of ice melt. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and I heard someone behind me gasp. Brenda looked like she had been slapped, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Her lawyer found his voice first. Your Honor, 30 days in jail is extremely harsh for a petty theft conviction. My client has no prior criminal record. This is excessive. Your client engaged in a campaign of harassment and abuse of authority, Judge Reynolds responded. The jail time is not just for the theft. It is for the pattern of behavior that the theft represents. It is to send a message that no one, not even an HOA president, is above the law. Miss Patterson, you will surrender yourself to the county jail by 5 p.m. today. Bailiff, please make the arrangements. The bailiff stood and approached Brenda, who looked like she might faint. Her lawyer tried to argue for a stay pending appeal, but Judge Reynolds denied it. Brenda was going to jail today. As they led her away to process her for jail intake, she turned and looked at me one last time. The expression on her face was pure hatred mixed with disbelief. She had probably never imagined that her petty theft and subsequent behavior would lead to this moment. Patricia grabbed my arm as we left the courtroom. 30 days in jail. I cannot believe it. I can. said Marcus, who was walking with us. "She terrorized this neighborhood for years. Maybe now people will feel like they can actually live in their own homes without constantly looking over their shoulders." The story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By that evening, everyone knew that Brenda Patterson was in jail. The reactions were mixed. Some people thought the sentence was too harsh for stealing a bag of ice melt. Others, particularly those who had been on the receiving end of Brenda's violation notices and fines, felt it was about time someone held her accountable. Tom Fletcher called another HOA meeting to address the situation. The meeting was held at the community center, and almost every household in the neighborhood sent at least one representative. Tom stood at the front of the room and addressed the crowd. "I know there has been a lot of confusion and concern about recent events," he began. "Brenda Patterson is no longer our HOA president. She has been convicted of theft and is currently serving a jail sentence. There are also pending charges related to financial misconduct during her time as president." The room buzzed with conversation. Tom held up his hand for quiet. "The board has been conducting a complete audit of our HOA finances and practices. We have discovered several irregularities that we are working to correct. We are also reviewing all violation notices issued in the past 2 years to determine which ones were legitimate and which ones were not. If you have received what you believe to be an unfair violation or fine, please submit a written appeal to the board and we will review it." A woman near the front raised her hand. "What about all the money Brenda stole? Who is going to pay that back?" "Brenda will be required to make restitution as part of her sentence," Tom said. "If she cannot or will not pay, we may need to pursue civil action to recover the funds. In the meantime, the board is implementing new financial controls to ensure this never happens again." The meeting lasted almost 2 hours, with neighbors sharing their experiences with Brenda and discussing how to move forward as a community. It was cathartic in a way, like everyone had been holding their breath for years and could finally exhale. I stayed quiet for most of the meeting, but toward the end, someone asked me to tell my story. I stood up and gave a brief account of the ice melt theft and the events that followed. When I finished, several people applauded, which felt strange. I had not set out to be a hero. I had just wanted my ice melt back and to be left alone. After the meeting, an older couple approached me. The husband extended his hand. "Thank you for what you did. We have been thinking about selling our house and moving just to get away from Brenda's harassment. Now maybe we can stay." Similar sentiments were expressed by others as I made my way to my car. It became clear that Brenda's behavior had been affecting far more people than I had realized. She had created an atmosphere of fear and intimidation, where people were afraid to park their cars in their own driveways or plant flowers in their own gardens without checking 17 different HOA rules first. The additional charges against Brenda went to trial 2 months later. I was called as a witness, along with several other neighbors. The evidence of embezzlement was straightforward. Bank records showed transfers from the HOA account to Brenda's personal account, with vague descriptions like community expenses or administrative costs. But the corresponding receipts and documentation did not exist, and the money had clearly been used for personal purposes. The extortion charges were based on several incidents where Brenda had threatened homeowners with excessive fines or legal action, unless they paid her directly for consulting services, to help them come into compliance with HOA rules. One couple had paid her $3,000 for such consulting, only to receive a single email with a list of paint colors. When they complained, she hit them with additional violations. The trial lasted 3 days. Brenda's defense was weak, relying mostly on arguing that she had been performing legitimate services and that any financial irregularities were unintentional. The jury did not buy it. They found her guilty on 4 counts of embezzlement and 2 counts of extortion. The sentencing for those convictions came 2 weeks later. The judge in that case, Judge Robert Hamilton, was equally unimpressed with Brenda's behavior. He sentenced her to 18 months in state prison, to run consecutively with the 30-day jail sentence from the theft conviction. She was also ordered to pay back all the money she had embezzled plus damages to the victims of her extortion scheme. In total, Brenda Patterson was facing close to 2 years in prison, all stemming from the day she decided to steal a bag of ice melt from my porch. Life in Meadowbrook Hills improved dramatically after Brenda's removal. Tom Fletcher proved to be a competent and reasonable HOA president. He streamlined the rules, removing many of the petty and overly restrictive regulations that Brenda had implemented or enforced selectively. Violation notices dropped by over 80%, and when they were issued, they were for legitimate concerns like seriously overgrown lawns or homes in need of obvious repairs. The board also implemented new procedures to prevent any future president from accumulating too much unchecked power. Financial decisions required approval from multiple board members, and there was now a formal appeals process for any violation notices. Homeowners were encouraged to attend board meetings and participate in community decisions. I settled into my house and actually started to enjoy living there. Without the constant fear of finding a violation notice on my door, I could relax and make my house feel like home. I planted some flowers in the spring, repainted my front door a nice shade of blue that was within the approved color palette, and even put up a small garden gnome that Patricia gave me as a joke. It was on the approved list, I checked. Patricia became a good friend. We often had coffee on weekend mornings and laughed about the absurdity of the whole situation. "You realize you are a legend in this neighborhood now," she told me one Saturday. "You are the guy who took down Brenda Patterson with a bag of ice melt." "I did not take her down," I protested. "She took herself down by breaking the law." "Semantics," Patricia said with a grin. "You stood up to her when no one else would. That matters." Marcus organized a neighborhood barbecue that summer, the first real community event we had without Brenda's controlling influence. Almost everyone showed up, and it felt like the neighborhood was finally becoming what it should have been all along. A place where people actually liked their neighbors and enjoyed living. I thought about the ice melt sometimes, about how such a small thing had led to such significant consequences. If Brenda had just returned it when I asked, or even if she had admitted what she did and apologized, none of this would have happened. But her arrogance and her belief that she was above the rules she so strictly enforced on others had been her downfall. Detective Chen stopped by my house one afternoon in late summer. We sat on my porch, which no longer gave me anxiety about packages being stolen, and she told me that the case had actually led to a broader investigation into HOA abuse in the area. "Your case opened a lot of eyes," she said. "We have been getting calls from other neighborhoods about similar situations. HOA presidents or board members who abuse their authority, embezzle funds, or use their positions to harass people. It is more common than anyone realized." "That is depressing," I said. "It is, but it is also good that it is coming to light. Your willingness to stand up and push back made a difference, not just in your neighborhood but potentially in others too." I did not really know what to say to that. I had just wanted my ice melt back and to be left alone. But I suppose that sometimes standing up for yourself, even in small ways, could have bigger implications. Brenda served her full sentence. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she tried to appeal her convictions multiple times, but each appeal was denied. When she was finally released, she moved out of state. Her house was sold to a young family with 2 kids who were friendly and normal, and did not care if my trash cans were visible for 3 hours instead of 2 on collection day. The HOA actually thrived under new leadership. Property values increased because people wanted to live in a well-maintained neighborhood that was not run by a tyrant. The community newsletter, which under Brenda had been mostly a list of violations and warnings, became a friendly update about neighborhood events and volunteer opportunities. I kept the security camera footage saved on my computer, though I never watched it again. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest actions can have the biggest consequences, and that standing up for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable or seems trivial, is important. Tom Fletcher served as president for a year, and then stepped down, saying he had done what he needed to do and wanted someone else to have a turn. The new president was a woman named Rachel Kim, who had moved into the neighborhood just before I did. She ran on a platform of transparency and community involvement, and she was elected unanimously. I attended HOA meetings regularly now, something I would never have done under Brenda's rule. It felt good to be part of the decision-making process and to help shape the community where I lived. We voted on things like whether to install new playground equipment in the common area, and whether to hire a landscaping company to maintain the entrance to the neighborhood. These were normal, reasonable discussions without threats or intimidation. One evening, about a year after the whole ordeal, Patricia and I were sitting on my porch watching the sunset. The weather was perfect, warm but not too hot with a light breeze. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Pushing the issue with Brenda, I mean." I thought about it. The whole thing had been stressful and time-consuming. I had spent hours dealing with police reports, court appearances, and depositions. But when I looked around at the neighborhood now, at kids playing in yards without their parents worrying about getting fined for toys being visible from the street, at neighbors chatting without fear of being reported for violation of some obscure rule, I knew the answer. "No," I said. "I do not regret it at all. Someone needed to stand up to her. It just happened to be me." "Because of ice melt," Patricia said, shaking her head with a smile. "Because of ice melt," I agreed. It was funny how life worked out sometimes. I had moved to this neighborhood hoping for a quiet, peaceful place to start over after my divorce. Instead, I had ended up in the middle of a legal battle with an HOA president who thought she was above the law. But in the end, the neighborhood had become exactly what I had hoped for in the first place. The whole experience taught me several important lessons. First, document everything. If I had not had that security camera footage, Brenda would have gotten away with stealing my ice melt and probably would have continued her pattern of abuse and harassment. Second, stand up for yourself even when it is uncomfortable. It would have been easier to just let the ice melt thing go, to buy a new bag and move on. But by standing up for myself, I had inadvertently helped an entire community break free from a toxic situation. Third, and perhaps most importantly, no one is above the law, no matter what position of authority they hold. Brenda thought that being HOA president gave her the right to do whatever she wanted, to take what she wanted, and to treat people however she pleased. She was wrong, and the legal system had proven that. I also learned that communities are stronger when people work together and hold each other accountable. The reason Brenda had been able to operate the way she did for so long was because people were isolated and afraid. Once we started talking to each other and supporting each other, her power evaporated. Marcus stopped by one evening with his wife and kids. We grilled burgers in my backyard, something that would have earned me a violation notice under Brenda because my grill was technically 4 inches closer to the property line than the HOA rules allowed. Now, no one cared as long as I was not bothering anyone. I still cannot believe she actually went to jail, Marcus said, flipping a burger, for ice melt. It was not really about the ice melt, his wife Jennifer said. It was about accountability. The ice melt was just the thing that finally brought it all to light. She was right. The ice melt was the catalyst. But the real issue had been Brenda's abuse of power and her belief that she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. The theft was just the most clear-cut, undeniable example of her behavior, captured on video where no amount of denial or excuse-making could explain it away. Their kids played in my yard with water guns, laughing and having fun. A year ago, that would have been impossible. Brenda would have cited some rule about noise levels or water usage or children being unattended, even though the parents were right there. Now, it was just a normal summer evening. I received a letter in the mail a few months later. It was from the Ohio Homeowner Association Coalition, a group I had never heard of before. They were inviting me to speak at a conference about my experience and the importance of HOA accountability. I almost threw the letter away, but Patricia convinced me to do it. "Your story needs to be told," she said. "There are probably thousands of people living under HOA tyranny right now, thinking they have no recourse. You can show them that they do." So I agreed. The conference was in Cleveland on a crisp October day. I was nervous, having never done any public speaking beyond work presentations, but when I got up in front of the room and saw the faces looking back at me, faces of people who understood exactly what I had been through, the nerves faded. I told my story simply and honestly. I talked about the ice melt, the security footage, the confrontation with Brenda, the police report, and the court case. I talked about the pattern of harassment that came to light and the additional criminal charges. I talked about how the neighborhood had changed since Brenda's removal. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. During the question and answer session, person after person stood up and shared their own stories of HOA abuse. Some were worse than what I had experienced. One man had been fined $20,000 over 3 years for various alleged violations, fines that the HOA had tried to collect by putting a lien on his house. A woman talked about an HOA president who had tried to force her to remove solar panels from her roof, even though state law protected her right to have them. The conference was eye-opening. I realized that my situation with Brenda was not unique. Across the country, HOAs were being used as tools of harassment and control by people who enjoyed wielding power over their neighbors. But I also met people who were fighting back, who were working to reform their HOAs or to pass legislation protecting homeowners from abuse. I left Cleveland feeling energized and hopeful. Change was possible. It required people willing to stand up and speak out, but it was possible. Back in Meadowbrook Hills, life continued to improve. The neighborhood held its first annual fall festival, with pumpkin carving contests and a bake sale to raise money for new benches in the common area. Kids trick or treated on Halloween without parents worrying about getting fined for decorations being up too early or too late. Christmas lights went up and came down according to each family's schedule, not according to Brenda's arbitrary deadlines. I started dating someone I met at a friend's party. Her name was Laura Stone, and she lived in a different neighborhood, one without an HOA. When I told her my story, she laughed and said she had always avoided HOAs specifically because she had heard too many horror stories. "Though I have to admit," she said, Yours is the first story I have heard where the HOA president actually went to jail. I did not set out to send her to jail, I said. I just wanted my ice melt back. That is what makes it so perfect, Laura said. You were not trying to be a hero or make a point. You just stood up for yourself and everything else followed from that. Laura and I grew closer over the following months. She appreciated that I had principles and was willing to stand up for them, even when it would have been easier to back down. She also appreciated that I was not someone who went looking for trouble. The situation with Brenda had found me, not the other way around. One winter evening, almost exactly 2 years after the ice melt theft, Laura and I were sitting in my living room watching the snow fall outside. My porch was empty except for a welcome mat. I had learned my lesson about leaving packages outside, though it was not really an issue anymore without Brenda around. Do you think about her sometimes? Laura asked. Brenda. Sometimes, I admitted. I wonder if she learned anything from the experience or if she is just bitter about getting caught. Probably bitter, Laura said. People like that rarely change. She was probably right, but it did not really matter. Brenda was gone, the neighborhood was better off, and life had moved on. The HOA held its annual meeting in January to elect new board members and discuss the year ahead. Rachel Kim was running for a second term as president, and she was unopposed. Tom Fletcher was stepping down from the board entirely, saying he was ready to just be a regular homeowner for a while. During the meeting, Rachel gave a State of the Union address that would have been unthinkable under Brenda's rule. She talked about financial transparency, community engagement, and the importance of treating each other with respect. She announced that the HOA had recovered all the money Brenda had embezzled, plus damages, through a combination of court-ordered restitution and a settlement with Brenda's insurance company. We are stronger now than we have ever been, Rachel said. Not because our lawns are perfectly manicured or because everyone's mailbox is the exact right shade of black, but because we have learned to work together and to treat each other as neighbors, not adversaries. The room applauded. I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, people I had come to know and respect over the past 2 years. Patricia caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up. Marcus nodded from across the room. These were good people who had been living under an oppressive system and had finally broken free. After the meeting, several new residents approached me. They had heard the story of Brenda and the ice melt and wanted to meet the person who had stood up to her. You have no idea how nice it is to move into a neighborhood where the HOA is actually reasonable, one woman said. We almost did not buy here because of some of the online reviews mentioning horror stories about the HOA. But then, we saw more recent reviews saying things had changed completely, and we decided to take a chance. The change was not because of me, I said. It was because of a lot of people working together to make things better. Maybe, the woman said, but you were the catalyst. You stood up when it mattered. As winter turned to spring, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. A simple act of theft, something so petty and small, had led to criminal charges, a jail sentence, additional felony convictions, and ultimately the transformation of an entire community. It seemed almost unbelievable when I thought about it that way. But each step had followed logically from the one before. Brenda stole the ice melt. I had proof. I filed a police report. She retaliated. The retaliation revealed a pattern of abuse. Investigation uncovered embezzlement and extortion. Each domino had fallen in sequence, all starting from that one moment when Brenda decided she was above the law. Laura and I got engaged that spring. I proposed in my backyard, the same backyard where we had spent countless evenings talking and laughing together. She said yes, and we started planning a wedding. Should we have the reception at the Meadowbrook Hills Community Center? Laura joked. I hear the HOA is really reasonable now. Do not even joke about that, I said, but I was smiling. The truth was, we probably could have had the reception there if we wanted to. The community center was actually a nice space, and Rachel would have been happy to arrange it. But we decided on a small venue in downtown Columbus instead. Patricia threw me a bachelor party, which mostly involved dinner and drinks at a nice restaurant rather than anything wild. Marcus gave a toast that made everyone laugh. Here's to Ethan, he said, raising his glass. The only man I know who defeated an HOA tyrant with ice melt and surveillance footage. May your marriage be long and happy, and may you never again have anything stolen from your porch. Everyone drank to that. The wedding was beautiful. We got married in late May, with the ceremony in a historic church and the reception at a renovated warehouse venue with exposed brick and string lights. Many of my neighbors attended, including Tom Fletcher and Rachel Kim, and a dozen others who had become friends over the past 2 years. During the reception, Tom pulled me aside. I wanted to thank you again for what you did, he said. I know it has been a while, but I do not think I ever properly expressed how much it meant to have someone finally stand up to Brenda. She made a lot of people miserable, and you freed us from that. You freed yourselves, I said. I just filed a police report. You and the others did the hard work of reforming the HOA and making it better. We would not have had the chance if you had not taken that first step, Tom insisted. So, thank you. Laura and I honeymooned in Costa Rica. 2 weeks of beaches and rainforests and absolutely no HOA drama. It was blissful. When we returned, Laura moved into my house in Meadowbrook Hills. She quickly became part of the community, joining the garden club and volunteering to help organize the summer block party. I was wrong about HOAs, she told me one evening. Or at least, I was wrong about all HOAs being terrible. This one is actually pretty great. It was not always that way, I reminded her. I know. But the fact that it could change, that people could take back control and make it work the way it should, that gives me hope. We settled into married life easily. The neighborhood continued to thrive under Rachel's leadership, and later under the presidents who followed her. The culture that had been established after Brenda's removal, one of transparency, respect, and reasonable enforcement of sensible rules, became the norm. I sometimes thought about how different things might have been if I had not had that security camera. If I had not filed that police report. If I had just let Brenda get away with taking my ice melt. She would probably still be HOA president, still terrorizing the neighborhood, still embezzling money and extorting homeowners. The thought made me grateful that I had stood up when I did, years past. Laura and I had a daughter, Emily, and then a son, Daniel. They grew up in Meadowbrook Hills, playing with other neighborhood kids and participating in community events. They would never know what the neighborhood had been like under Brenda's rule, and that was exactly how it should be. One day when Emily was about 5, she asked me why we had a security camera pointing at the porch. It is to keep us safe, I said. From what? She asked with that innocent curiosity only children have. From people who might take things that do not belong to them, I said. That is stealing, Emily said confidently. Stealing is bad. Yes, it is, I agreed. And when people steal, there are consequences. Like time out, she asked. Something like that, I said, smiling. I never told my kids the full story of Brenda and the ice melt. It was not something they needed to know, at least not while they were young. Maybe someday, when they were older and could understand the broader implications, I would tell them. But for now, They could just enjoy living in a friendly neighborhood with reasonable rules and neighbors who looked out for each other. Patricia became one of Laura's closest friends. They often went walking together in the evenings, pushing strollers when the kids were babies, and later just enjoying the exercise and conversation. Patricia loved telling the story of Brenda and the ice melt to anyone who would listen, much to my embarrassment. "You are a legend," she would say. "Accept it." "I am not a legend," I would protest. "I am just a guy who filed a police report." But in a way, maybe Patricia was right. Not because I had done anything heroic, but because I had shown that ordinary people could stand up to abuse of power, even in something as mundane as an HOA. I had proven that documentation and persistence, and a willingness to go through the proper legal channels, could produce real results. The security camera footage that started everything was still saved on my computer, backed up in 3 different places. I had been called to testify in 2 other HOA abuse cases in nearby communities, both times bringing my video as an example of the importance of evidence. In both cases, the abusive HOA officials were removed from power and faced legal consequences. It felt good to help others, to know that my experience could make a difference beyond just my own neighborhood. The Cleveland conference had led to speaking invitations at other events, and I had become something of an accidental advocate for HOA reform. I never sought out the role, but I accepted it because I believed it was important. Laura supported me in this unexpected advocacy work, often attending events with me and sharing her perspective as someone who had married into an HOA community. Together, we tried to spread the message that HOAs could be positive forces in neighborhoods, but only when they operated with transparency, accountability, and respect for the homeowners they were supposed to serve. Looking back now, all these years later, I can see how one moment changed everything. Brenda Patterson stealing a bag of ice melt from my porch was a tiny act in the grand scheme of things. But it was also the final straw, the undeniable proof of a pattern of behavior that had been going unchecked for too long. If she had been just a little less arrogant, if she had admitted what she did, or even just ignored me after I confronted her, things might have turned out differently. But her certainty that she was untouchable, that her position as HOA president put her above accountability, had been her undoing. The 30 days in jail that Judge Reynolds gave her for the theft conviction had seemed harsh to some people at the time. But combined with the 18 months for the embezzlement and extortion charges, it had sent a clear message that abuse of power within an HOA would not be tolerated. That message had resonated far beyond just Meadowbrook Hills. I still lived in the same house, still walked the same streets, still attended HOA meetings, but everything was different now. The fear and tension that had permeated the neighborhood under Brenda's rule were gone, replaced by a genuine sense of community. People helped each other, looked out for each other, and actually enjoyed living here. And it all started with a bag of ice melt and a security camera. Sometimes the smallest things really do matter the most. Sometimes standing up for yourself, even over something trivial, can change everything. And sometimes, justice prevails exactly the way it should. Brenda Patterson had thought she was too powerful to face consequences for her actions. She had been wrong. The legal system had worked the way it was supposed to work, holding her accountable for her crimes and protecting the community from further abuse. My ice melt was long gone, used up that first winter to keep my driveway safe. But the impact of its theft would last far longer, a reminder that no one is above the law, and that sometimes the most ordinary people can make an extraordinary difference simply by refusing to accept injustice, even in its smallest forms. That was the real story, the real lesson. Not that an HOA president went to jail for stealing ice melt, but that a community found its voice and took back control from someone who had abused power for far too long. The ice melt was just the beginning, the catalyst that started everything else in motion. And as I sat on my porch on a warm summer evening, watching my kids play in the yard and waving to neighbors walking by, I knew that every moment of stress, every hour spent dealing with police reports and court appearances, every uncomfortable confrontation had been worth it. This was what a neighborhood should be, and I was grateful to have played a part in making it that way.